Brace your bank account. The holidays are coming. 30% of Americans admit they overspend during the holiday season, which can cause you headaches come January. But today on Mom Squad, we talk to a financial planner and mom about how to make sure your holiday cheer doesn't break you, and the best ways to set your boundaries with your family when it comes to gifting. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Mom Squad, the show where we talk all things parenting. I'm Maureen Kyle, and we are getting ready for the most wonderful time of the year and the most expensive. I am sure I am not the only one who thinks they set a budget and then never sticks to it. So today, we are going to talk to a financial planner about how to make those small steps to not put yourself in financial ruin just for a little bit of holiday magic. And I have some of my fellow penny pinching moms with me, Danielle Wiggins and Holly Strano, to talk about how we try to rein it in during the holidays. And we're talking pretty much every morning about, oh my gosh, the spending. So thanks for sitting here, and we're going to share a lot of advice on how we do this. But I mean, are you guys getting nervous heading into these months just because the cost of everything is going up and, you know, your spending money is shrinking?
Right. Well, I mean, and our kids are a little older. So I feel like the older they get, the more expensive it gets.
Right.
Yeah. You have teenagers, I have a preteen and a teenager, and every day we're doing stories about the high costs of everything, inflation, as well as Thanksgiving going up. You have to spend for that. We had the story about people going out to eat for Thanksgiving because that might be cheaper than hosting a holiday party. So you're like, oh my goodness, then Christmas, Hanukkah, or whatever, Kwanzaa that you're celebrating where you want to get gifts.
And at the same time, despite the expense, you want it to be perfect.
Right, right. So we're going to talk about the emotional. Because this time of year, that's what you get sucked into. I mean, even yesterday, can I admit, I went to a store to look for something not dishware related, and I had my 4-year-old with me, and she sees Grinch cereal bowls, and I'm like, oh, but it's only $7. So I threw it in the cart because I was like, that's going to be magical. But now I just bought bowls that maybe we use for 6 weeks out of the year. You know, I fell victim to the emotional spending that comes during the holidays of trying to make it so special.
I'm a marketer's dream.
And those are the budget busters right there. And then in February, you're like, why did I get these bowls?
Even my dogs, I get sucked into like, oh, Maya's gonna wear this Rudolph outfit. And she doesn't. I mean, you know, but you do.
And we're gonna talk about that more because it is a lot of spending for a very short amount of time. So we have to weigh whether it's worth it or not. And the emotional. We talked to a financial planner, Kathryn Bryan from Skylight Financial, about staying away from those emotional decisions and also what you should be doing to make sure that you don't overspend this holiday season. This is that time of year where all of a sudden the holiday decorations are out in the stores and people start to get emotionally excited and tied to the holidays. Do you think this is one of those times of year where we do get swept away and tend to forget about our finances?
For sure, for sure. And everybody does it. So it's not something that's just like one person does it. It's one of those times that we really get together, we're the family, we're friends. Our kids are asking us for these expensive gifts that we're not really sure how we're going to afford. So it is a time where we get really emotional. Plus you have family and friends coming in that can add a whole nother stress. When we're stressed, our brains produce cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and that has been shown to produce bad behaviors. And that's like overeating, overspending, not exercising, all those things. And so that can really leak into our budgets a lot of times.
So what do you think step one is when you sit down and you're thinking, okay, I am going to create a budget and I'm going to stick to it? How do you come up with that budget realistically?
Yeah, it's always good to start at the beginning of the year. So if you can and you do this at the beginning of the year, that's great. But for many people, this is November, December, you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I didn't do any budgeting for this, and that's okay. So the first step would be just to really figure out what is going to come into the household for income in November and December. Really figure out what you need for savings and try to put that away first, and then really pay your expenses, and then whatever's left over really should be for gifts. Now, I'm a mom of 2, so I know that that doesn't work out always as well. So if you don't and you have to use a credit card or you have to put something on debt, make sure that you are using a really low interest or a zero interest credit card. And I always recommend using just one, especially for the holidays. When we have lots of credit cards, it tends to get a little bit more like I'm putting some on this one and then this one, and then we overspend and we don't even realize it.
Where is it that, I want to pinpoint exactly, like, where do you think people start to derail, and where do we really derail when we start to look at those numbers?
Yeah, I think it is a couple things. One, it's not really having a list to follow. So, you know, when we're going through a lot of stress and emotions, we tend to forget what we really are supposed to get, or I buy something extra that I really didn't intend to, and so we derail there. But the other piece is this is a time for enjoyment and time to be with people that you love and your friends and family. So a lot of times it's part of an activity where we're going out for brunch and then we're going shopping or we're getting a coffee. It's all those extras that we tend to spend on with, you know, going to the coffee shop a couple times that day or going to get a glass of wine with our friends. Yeah. Those are really the ones that kind of add up.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, and I do it too sometimes, where it's like, okay, well, I have this really expensive time of year coming up. I know that if I put it on a credit card, I can pay it in like January or February, and then all of a sudden that credit card statement comes, and it's like, oh my gosh, wait, I really relied on that credit card a little too much. Yeah. Is that a pitfall that many people fall into, and then how do you climb out of that?
Yeah, it's like credit cards are great when you're trying to build credit. If you already have the money sitting in your savings account, it is fine to use a credit card and then just know you're going to pay it off the next month. Most people don't do that, and that's the credit card game where they just know that you're not going to be able to pay it off, so you're paying that higher interest on those credit cards. So what we like to do instead is really say, try to use that one credit card, don't use a lot of them. If you are looking at your credit card, you know, you really want to try to minimize that use, because if you have life gets in the way, things are going to happen and you're going to end up going back on that credit card. So you want to put more money into your savings first.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit reality too, because I think we touched upon it so far, but we haven't really gone into it. Really looking at a gift, and you mentioned like the kids want expensive things. Yeah. You know, there's the wish list of like, well, I want an iPad and I want this video game console. How do you start to look at, okay, this is what I can afford, and being honest with yourself about what you can't afford? How do you figure out that number?
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. It's trying to figure out the negotiable and the non-negotiable, right? So if you find that you're really using your credit cards and you're maxing them out for these gifts, then you are way over the budget that you need to be in. If you're looking at your budget, you know, things to do that you can do are swap gifts with other parents that maybe have older kids that have something that, even if it's secondhand iPad, will be good for your kid.
Yeah.
Set the expectations with your kids. That's a really important one, to just say, okay, you know, if you really want this big gift, I can only get you that one, but I can't get you a bunch of other little things. Right. Or what's the most important gift? Or what are other parents or families, can they come in and try to help contribute to those dollars?
Speaking of the little things that add up too, are there places in the budget, like in our monthly budget, that you think that we can cut back on in those holiday months, where you look at, okay, well, I usually spend X amount on groceries. Sometimes that's not, you know, maybe it's, you have a couple pasta dinners, but are there places like that? Where do you look at categories to pull back on during those certain months so that you are able to spend a little bit more? Yeah,
so when we look at the expenses, things like dining out, you know, if you're doing it 3 or 4 times a week, maybe it's better just to go and get groceries for that week if in these months that maybe are a little more strapped for cash. Coffees are a big one. You know, when we go out and we spend $3 to $4 a day, and I go out and I don't realize that my spouse or partner also went out, that's, you know, a lot of money that adds up over time. So coffees, it's if you really need to find ways to scrimp, it's maybe decreasing your streaming devices for the next couple months, and then getting back into them like in January or February. Looking at all the apps that we use that maybe we paid, you know, that $2 a month for, $20 a month for, depending on the apps. So all the things that aren't necessary for your life are probably the things that you can just decrease for those few months to save on extra dollars.
Yeah. Are there any tricks that you have kids, your mother running a household, are there any tricks that you specifically use for yourself that maybe, you know, as a financial planner, you have, you're probably more wise than most of us. I'm talking about myself. on how to save and how to go about that budget? Anything that you personally do?
Yeah, I definitely always save and pay myself first. So, you know, through the ages, we've heard this pay yourself first, and that really is an important thing. When we say pay yourself first, it's really making sure that we pay into our savings first, and then pay our fixed expenses, and then pay into our debts, and then whatever's left over is the fun money. When we start to see those dollars add up in our savings accounts, it takes the stress away. It allows you to have flexibility to invest more. It allows you to have flexibility to go on vacations and do some of the things that you want to do, give gifts that you want to give, and not have to worry about it when you do it.
Yeah, and once you've overspent and you feel like you're in a hardship and there is no savings to rely on, what do you recommend? Like if I was a client that came to you and said, okay, I really blew it, I've maxed out this credit card, or I'm close to it and I have $200 in my savings account, what do I do?
Yep. So we really recommend going and building a strategy. It all comes back to the emotional part of finance and then building a strategy on top of it. When we get emotional, we don't make the best decisions. So when we put it to a strategy of saying if we have 4 or 5 credit cards, it's building the strategy of which ones to pay first. Typically, we want to pay the ones with the highest interest rate first. What typically happens is if I have extra dollars at the end of the month and I have all these credit cards, I just kind of emotionally pay extra on some of them. But if we take all that extra money and put it towards the highest interest rate card, and then when that one's paid off, you know, pay the minimums on the other, and then pay them off strategically, we typically have a higher rate of success.
Another big thank you to Kathryn Bryan, financial planner with Skylight Financial Group. And she brought up a lot of great points that we can put into action. But first, I want to hear from you two about how you set those boundaries. Because as we talked before, and as Kathryn mentioned, you get into, when you have older kids, they want the bigger ticket items. And so when your kid comes to you and says, I want a laptop, and you have to say,
or a gaming system.
A gaming system.
An Xbox or a PlayStation. Those are really expensive.
Would you ever say, then that's it?
No.
No.
And I'm just being really transparent. No. And I end up like hurting financially because of it. And so what I do is I'll tend to get then smaller things because I feel like I want that under the tree to be full and magical and Santa and not just one item.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm guilty as charged. I am sucked into the season.
Yeah.
I really am.
It's very difficult to stick to a budget, especially in my household, because I think that my mother's love language when I was a child was Christmas. You know, and if you didn't think Mama loved you, you knew she did on Christmas. There were gifts everywhere. It's like my brother and I, he's 4 years older than me, and it's like, oh, you walk down. And so the emotional part for me is I feel guilty if I don't recreate that Christmas for my children. And it was interesting because the first year, my son is 14 now, but when he was 1, my husband and I, we were struggling financially. I was going back to school, I was in grad school, he was transitioning careers, so we didn't have any money. And I had all the money. I didn't want to use credit cards, so because I didn't know if we could pay him. So I bought one gift and I cried that morning. He was 1, he didn't care.
He didn't know.
You know, he was playing with the wrappers.
Play with the bow age.
The gifts, but it was really
so
hard for me.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up because it's the same thing with my family. And I think we all fall into that tradition and what we grew up. My parents still do it. They still do it now for the grandchildren. So it's like living up to, I think we have to just establish our own identities. It's so hard, though. It's so hard. And, you know, you just don't want to burst those bubbles. And we have that magical scene in our head of running down the steps or whatever it is, and the tree's lit and the gifts are all sparkling. And
well, I'm glad you brought up grandparents, too, because this is what I've been doing over the past couple of years. And I have some friends who have shared, like, how do you set those boundaries? And my kids are still little. I'm pretty sure, you know, we're still in that magical phase. So I let them know that I have written Santa Claus, and they get 3 gifts from Santa, and they get 3 from Mom and Dad. So they have to pick which 3 they want from Santa. And so then when we go visit Santa, that's what they're telling them. And then they get 3 from us. Because when there was no limit, then we would buy a whole bunch, and then we go straight to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and then there's a whole bunch, and then, you know, and they started to not appreciate, like, toys were getting tossed to the side and never being used. Ever. Like, I mean, in February, I'd look and be like, they never even opened this packaging. And so limiting, I think that there are ways to limit. And then I've had friends who also use this saying that, and they tell their kids, you get something you want, something you need, something to wear, something to read.
Oh, that's
so there you are with a toy, then some sort of needed item, which my 7-year-old this year has asked for an alarm clock. She's very practical.
No, so like, you know, kids do ask for things.
They might have a practical. So you tell them, tell me something you want, something you need, something to wear. So then you have maybe another necessary item, like a sweater or whatever clothes they want. And then something to read, I think, is such a good way of saying this is not all about just toys. I mean, like, give them something that.
And then I feel like another one I'd add to that list is a surprise. Because I think kids love the surprise element of something they didn't realize they're getting. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I always go over the 3. You know, then there's always like, really, I do 4 because then I gotta, and then there's, you know, all those little extras.
I applaud you because when you, I literally have gone into their closets and there are things that are in boxes that are not even open. And there have been years where they get bored opening gifts.
One of my children did that. I'm tired of opening gifts.
Is this the last one?
It wasn't from us because grandparents came in, which I am so thankful. Grandma and Grandpa.
You gotta none of this is not about thankful, grateful, but like it's the truth.
Sometimes there's overload. But then do you forget, because I feel like then this is the other creep that starts to sink in over the a few days before the holidays. Then you start to think about all the tipping that happens or like teachers' gifts. I always tend to not budget for, you know, you think of the family members and the people you consistently buy for. And then there's always that, oh, wait, I forgot about
the garbage.
Or like donating to this charity because at school they're collecting for this charity or that charity. I still have not figured out how to remind myself. And is that you write on the calendar in January, you flip to the, November page and write, don't forget.
Especially teachers.
The mailman, the teachers, and start to budget that way.
I've been terrible. Thank you.
And
I need to do better because I think even in the holiday season, when you go to parties and I know, you're like, oh, they're giving you a gift because they want to, but I feel obligated if someone gives me a gift that I feel like I have to give it back.
Same.
Even though I'm like, oh, if I give you a gift, I don't expect one in return, but I just, you don't want to show up empty-handed and people are giving you gifts. So that's where the budget is busted.
It's so true.
At different places.
I'm really bad at, I love to give. I'm so bad at receiving.
I mean, that's a hard thing to do. So do you think people will have grace? I mean, that's another question I'm putting in my own head of this year when costs are skyrocketing. And, if you're the one hosting a holiday party or dinner for your family, you're spending extra. So do we have a little grace this year of if you don't receive that gift or maybe that holiday card, is it sort of like, I understand. I get it.
It depends on the person because, and this is also in the back of my head. I remember when I was younger and there was a family member and I watched them open the gift and they hated the gift.
Oh, geez.
I mean, and they just talked about how much they hated this gift.
No way.
And I can tell it wasn't that expensive. And, but I think it was more of maybe the person who was giving the gift didn't think about whom they were giving it to. So that I don't really like this gift, but that sticks in the back of my head. So it's like, well, that person didn't have grace for this person who gave them a gift. So I got to make sure that I have the best gifts, to whomever I'm giving the gifts to. For our household, I know I set a budget for each person that we're giving gifts for. So the kids have this. And then Chris is my husband, who we said we're going to spend this amount on each other. We're going to spend this amount on grandparents and things like that. And I do pretty well with sticking to it. But again, it's those other gifts of outside somebody, oh, such and such says
or
they
a
got
neighbor
a gift of
even
us.
stops by, and you know, things sneak up on you.
And she talked about too, Kathryn talked about the credit cards. And yesterday, as we were walking past each other, Danielle and I talked about, you know, I know that I just kind of rely on, okay, well, January, I'll have a little bit more spending money, so I'll put it on the credit card. I'll pay it off in January. But sometimes it creeps into February, and then it creeps into March.
The interest.
And the interest rates right now. So do you feel like heading into this year, are you going to rely on credit cards? I mean, I think most of us
I think we all
will
have,
be, but,
yes, to some degree.
but does that scare you at all?
Yes.
Or like, do you feel like you're constantly like recovering from the holidays?
It stresses me out totally.
It scares me because I know that to be responsible, I should not use them as much. But it's that getting over that emotional feeling of, oh, there's not enough gifts.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or, oh my, but we've already prepared our kids. We have two, again, they're 11 and 14. Hey, this year is not going to be like, oh, you know, but tell us the one thing that you really want, that if it's not under the tree, that you will be disappointed. And so that's what we look for, like, okay, that one thing that they want, and hopefully it's in the budget range, and as long as they have that. And then you try to find like different experiences to do around the holidays that don't cost so much.
See,
for instance, we do a breakfast in the morning, and we stay in our pajamas all day, and we watch movies.
Right.
So those are the things that hopefully that they will remember as well.
And that's the stuff that I wish we had more grace about. When and this is like off but on subject, is that the stuff that really matters in the holiday season. I always preach this to my parents, and again, saying it with the most grateful heart.
Right.
I don't care about the gifts. I care about baking cookies together and the get-togethers, and those are the things that I remember watching Elf and the Santa Claus and stuff like that with hot chocolate. It's just, gosh, if we could just really live that way, you know, because we all say, I think a lot of us have that same mindset. This is what we really care about.
I love that you said that, because this reminds me, and I'm sure I showed both of you the letter that last year she was 8, but my 9-year-old, my oldest, wrote to Santa, because I said, go ahead, write your letters to Santa, and she sealed the envelope and didn't let me see. So then I'm like steaming the envelope like I'm the FBI, like, okay, well, what did she say? What is she asking for? Why didn't she want me to see this? And the letter said, Dear Santa, thank you for all my gifts last year. You did such a great job. It was basically like, I'm going to trust you to come up with the gifts this year. My favorite part about the holidays is making gingerbread cookies. Like, she didn't, you know, I think are we doing our kids a disservice by focusing so much on the gifts, where you, like you were saying, it's like the baking the cookies, it's the watching the movies. Like, we have to even keep in mind that those moments to our kids are also big gifts.
Huge.
And the traditions.
The season.
And that's really important, because some people are really going through a hard time this season. Like, you know, we're still recovering from the pandemic, and people, they might not even have the credit cards to use. And so it's amazing what you say. Create the environment, create the love that's there that may not cost that much, but will last a lifetime.
Right.
Because it's like, you can have gifts and gifts galore, but if your home isn't a place of love, people are not going to remember that holiday.
Danielle preaches it.
No, and it's so true. The magic is in the season and the memories that are created. Right. Not in the ripping and are we done yet? Yeah. And sadly, I just wish that I could practice what I preach, because I really do believe. You know, I do believe that that's what matters most.
So what keeps you from doing that?
I don't know.
I
go back to I was going to say probably exactly the same as you. Guilt from childhood, from walking into a magical room where, you know, papers matched and glistened with bows, and it's still that way. Right. And I say to my parents every year, like, no, don't. We don't need these things.
But they probably love it.
What they grew up with. And
See, I was just about to say, like, this was a great therapy session.
I know. Thank you. And then can I lay down on this couch?
And then as we go through the weeks of the holidays, as we get through there, and we totally forget this therapy session and we overspend, I'm bringing Kathryn back in January, and she's going to talk about how you she's going to talk about going on that debt diet and how to like financially make over your whole life. in the new year. So we're bringing her back in January once we forget all of this.
Yes. No, we're not.
We're not. We're going to stick to it.
Let's name it and claim it. We got it.
We got to stick to it.
I know.
Danielle, Holly, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to other moms, other parents, and be like, what do you do? What do I do? And come to that realization of like, you know what? Let's just bake some cookies and sit in the season and enjoy it.
Yeah, like decorate the tree.
Right.
Drink some popcorn.
Yeah. So thanks to both of you. And all this month, we are going to tackle topics leading up to the holiday season, like finding the best gifts to fit into your budget. We're going to have some toys coming up, and also teaching your kids gratitude. That is a huge mountain to climb. So we'll have that coming up over the next several weeks. Thanks for tuning into Mom Squad. We'll see you right back here next week.